Er zijn 3 dingen in het leven van een kunstenaar. Ten eerste, te kunnen werken. Ten tweede, goed te kunnen werken. En ten derde, de grootst mogelijke weerklank bij zijn publiek te vinden.
Who's afraid of art? Tyrants and wannabe tyrants, so it seems.
Artist Alexandra Skotchelenko has been sentenced to 7 years in prison by St. Petersburg's invasion, spreading false information, defamation.
With autocracy growing, with tyrants on the roll, the Balie brings together over 40 international artists, writers and thinkers during Forum on European Culture. We celebrate the subversive power of art and literature and curate works of opposition that preserve the histories autocrats want to erase and imagine the futures they fear.
So my question is, Mr. President, what are you so afraid of?
Art against the tyrants. Not for the faint-hearted.
A good afternoon and a very warm maybe welcome on this warm afternoon, Sunday afternoon to the Balie. My name is Yuri Albrecht. I will be conducting this conversation. I'm director of the Balie. Welcome at Art Against the Tyrants. We're doing this every 2 years, Forum on European Culture. And this year we're doing it under the motto of Art Against the Tyrants. And that's also about culture against the tyrants and maybe even about politics against the tyrants. And today we'll be talking about Germany specifically. How does Germany think of itself? What tyrants does it want to fight? And how does its own past tyrant still informs that fight? That is what we will be talking about tonight, and we will be to this evening, and we will be talking about Germany's reaction to 2 recent wars, the war in Ukraine and the war in Gaza. And we'll be talking about what we need to understand about Germany to understand those 2 different reactions. And we've asked 2 persons who are especially well poised to talk about these questions. First, Caroline de Gruyter. Well-known journalist and political analyst. She's been here yesterday evening as well. She's been here many times. By now I would call you a regular to the to the debates here in the Balie. She's a European affairs correspondent, columnist of the leading Dutch newspaper NRC. I think it's called NRC and not NRC Handelsblad anymore, isn't it? Yeah. That's, okay, NRC. And regular contributing to, among others, foreign policy, EU Observer, The Standard. She spent more than 20 years covering Europe from different points of view, also the Middle East. She lived in the Middle East, she lived in many places in Europe. And she is the author of, I think, about 6 books, if I'm not mistaken, mostly touching on Europe. And like the more recent book, the international successful book, Beter wordt het niet. It won't get any better. Well, how's it translated into English?
It depends on the language. There are like 5 translations, not English, but there's one in German, there was one in French. In German it's called das Hapsburger Reich. Ein Beispiel für Europa, something boring. But in French they borrowed a line from Stefan Zweig and they called it Monde d'hier, Monde de demain. Beautiful.
Die Welt van gestern.
Die Welt van gestern, which plays a role in the book, of course.
Yeah, it does. It does. It's wonderful.
The Hungarian version I can't pronounce. So.
No, hardly anybody can except the Hungarians, of course. Yes, and that's, of course, you understand probably. It compares, among others, the EU to the Hapsburg Empire. That book. And Philipp Oehmke, warm welcome to you as well. Wonderful you're here. Grew up in Bonn. I think in that time it was still the capital of the Bundesrepublik, wasn't it? Yeah. And studied journalism and among others, played Columbia University. Worked for the Süddeutsche Zeitung. Is now heading the cultural section of Der Spiegel. In 2015, moved to New York, returning to Berlin in 2020, and he wrote a biography of the German punk band Die Toten Hosen. That's been on the bestseller list for quite a while, isn't it? Yeah. Die Toten Hosen are sort of a... I don't think outside Germany many people really know them, but in Germany they're really sort of iconic band. Yeah.
They are
Yeah.
maybe in Switzerland and Austria and Argentina for some weird reason.
And Argentina. Did your book also sell in Argentina? Yeah.
Yeah, I did, and I went there with them. I don't know, for some weird coincidence.
Right. There's my
for some weird coincidence.
because there are people watching at home and they need to be able to hear you. Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's a bestseller in Argentina as well. Yeah. And you fairly recently wrote a novel, Schönwald. In Dutch, I think it's translated as de Schönwalds, but in Germany it's not plural. And you're working on a sequel, is that right?
Kind of, yeah. Spin-off sequel, at least another novel where some of the same characters will show up again, some new characters, and just started.
It's a great success, the novel. It must be very nice to sort of also move into literature.
Yeah, absolutely. After almost 30 years of journalism, there were things that I thought I couldn't actually grasp with my journalistic toolbox, and topics like family and family trauma and how we deal with each other is something that's easier explored in a fictional way than in a journalistic way, because it's a lot of speculation that you have to do, and which is not really allowed in journalism.
No, that's right. But you have to find people who actually can explain that about their own families or lives and write it all. Yeah, I understand. And this novel is very much about that generational, maybe trauma of history and how people deal with those different aspects of history in their family.
Yeah, and the long reach of German history and the Holocaust and the Second World War, and where on the surface it looks like it's 60, 70, 80 years later, 3 generations later, so it doesn't have anything to do with it. And then the undercurrents, you still find stuff that comes or stems from that time.
Yeah, that's partly, of course, why we asked you, because this ties in very neatly with how Germany actually operates in the world and looks at itself, of course. Maybe first to kick off, we're talking about tyrants in this festival, about culture, but also about tyrants. And what tyrant would you think of what kind would you immediately think of, Caroline, if I may?
In Europe?
Yeah, or in Germany.
Historically, or
do I win the fridge now?
Yeah.
Okay, Adolf Hitler.
Yeah, you would think. Yeah, that's sure. And Philip.
Historically, I would say the same. Contemporary, I would think of Vladimir Putin, maybe.
Yeah. Right. Is he sort of the ultimate? Is he still the ultimate villain?
The ultimate villain, I wouldn't know. But I think he checks the boxes for tyrant.
Yeah, absolutely, he does, absolutely. But
but does it matter if he's the ultimate villain or just a horrible villain? Not sure.
Not sure, but
the war has developed so much over time, and it's become so much dominated by technology, and so war is all through history. I'm writing a book about Europeans and war now. They make more and more victims. They're becoming more and more deadly. And he was, almost the last in Europe to do this. So I guess he's also, in that sense, he's the worst.
Yeah.
State getting more powerful, having more tech at its disposal, and there you go.
Yeah, because yesterday we've been talking to Nino Haratischvili, among many others, and she did a wonderful supra, which you were there earlier in the, and she sort of was dismayed by the fact that she said only recently, I realized that Stalin is really as bad as Hitler. And she said something like along the lines of, as a Georgian living in Germany, she didn't realize for many years that, she knew everything about Hitler, but hardly anything about Stalin. And then she came sort of to the conclusion that there's something weird with it, because Western Europeans always think that they're better, and they're even better at tyrants. So that there's a hierarchy of tyranny, and that
ask a Cambodian, and he will mention Pol Pot.
yeah.
It's also experience and perspective, of course.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And it's also what lives on in us, in all, not just in the Germans, but in all of us.
Yeah. No, but of course, I mean, to many Dutch, of course, Hitler would spring to mind first, and that's partly because we lived through it. We have a history with it, but it's also, I thought it was an interesting thought. There might be a hierarchy in not only are we very good democratic societies, but also we are the best at the villains and the tyranny and the dictatorship.
Yeah, I mean, that's always been an important factor of German past-war German identity. We've been debating over the fact whether the Holocaust or Adolf Hitler, for that matter, was singular, which we tended to believe, or not. And then starting in the 80s, there was this huge debate among historians whether it is actually true, the singularity of the Holocaust. And now with Gaza and Israel and everything, this question is posed even stronger, in a stronger way in German society, especially from the outside, from other countries.
And some call it Historikerstreit. How would you look upon that discussion? We will touch on Gaza, of course, later on. But is there a sort of the uniqueness of what happened in Germany? It's difficult to answer, I know, for a German, but well, I'm really interested in it because you write about it also.
My answer would be that for a start, as Germans, we should still look upon the Holocaust and the Third Reich as something that only Germans did, and that is something that's very singular to Germans and the German history. And I wouldn't start comparing it to other stuff. But of course, like 80 years later, times have changed. The whole international setup has changed, and it poses other questions to German identity, which might be more important now than hanging on to this dogma of the Holocaust and the Third Reich has been a singular event. If it means that we can't operate in a sovereign way in foreign politics, and it kind of hampers us to do the right thing, we should overthink it. That's my very cautious answer to that.
Well, it's very precise
question
as well, and thank you for it. How do you look upon that discourse, Caroline?
I think it's very true. I think the war lives on, but again, not just in the Germans, but in all of us.
Mm-hmm. As Western Europeans,
as an undercurrent, yes, of course. You know why? So I lived in Gaza and Jerusalem in the 1990s, just after the Oslo Accords, for 5 years. So I've seen Europeans that then, in a smaller setting. There were, I think, 15 member states at the time, or 12, still 12. Trying to make, to keep the peace process going there.
Yeah.
Germany, but also the Netherlands, was always supporting the Israelis. Other countries, for instance, Ireland, was much more, but also Spain. They were much more, and Italy too, to a certain extent. They were sort of, hanging a little bit on the other side. So it was very difficult finding a balance. And now we're many more countries, but there are many more countries, especially the Central European countries, which are incredibly pro-Israeli for historical reasons. I mean, I went to Slovenia in 2015 because there was a sort of a last hiccup of the banking crisis in Slovenia. And I go there, and I knew some high official in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs was the only Slovene I knew. So I called him and he said, sure, let's have lunch. But we'll meet a little bit later. Then the restaurant is not too crowded and noisy and we can talk. So I enter the restaurant. It's almost empty. The guy comes in and he, with a huge envelope under his arm, he opens the envelope and out come pictures of dead bodies. So I says, What does this have to
Good
do?
for lunch. Yeah.
I mean, this all went back, and I will not bore you with the details, but I found my old notes back, and this whole conversation as well. I mean, everything still goes back to the Second World War, the partisans versus the fascists. And some people didn't have the choice, but your family is still cast in those terms. And this has been suppressed for a long time, and it's coming up. Why is the Netherlands so pro-Israeli? Because apart from Germany, there's no country in Europe where so many Jews have been deported, never to come back. It's almost 80% of all the Jews. I live in Belgium now. You know how high the percentage is in Belgium? They're anarchists. They don't have lists of anybody. They don't give a damn. They don't even talk to each other. 27%. So, we are just so... After the war, we never wanted to admit it. So I grew up with people, on the 9th of May coming into our primary school, Verzetshelden, resistance heroes, talking about how good they had been and about good and bad. And even as a child, I remember not trusting these guys. It's like, if you really have to boast so much about how good you were, you need to make that point, because you're probably overshouting something. So it took, just like in Germany, it took in the Netherlands and in France. France is on the good side just because de Gaulle was in London. Mm-hmm. For the rest, the French, they deported all the Jews on behalf of the Nazis. So, I mean, all of us have tried to turn the page, and I think we have turned the page, but it doesn't mean that all these old stories have disappeared. Sorry to be long.
There's
that's what my book will be about this.
I'm glad that it's not only the Germans.
Austria. I've lived in Austria for 4 years. I mean, they haven't even started.
Yeah, that's true.
We are the first victims of Hitler. End of story.
Let alone Italy. I mean, if you go to a sort of what we call the 4th of May ceremony in Italy, you believe that Italy was a victim of fascism. That's what you act out there. Still today, by the way. So, but yes, there's a lot of that still going around. Yeah, that's very obvious. Caroline, you said. If we look at the post-war history of Germany, you said there are actually 3 periods of post-war history in Germany. Is that? Can you explain that a little bit? What 3 periods could we identify?
Yeah, and they totally coincide with 3 periods of different Europes, right? Because after the Second World War, we decided to embed Germany in European structures, together with the French. So the last 3 wars were
Western Germany, that was, of course.
Western Germany, of course. So the last 3 wars were fought between Germany and France. So in order to prevent the 4th one from happening, we bound Germany and France with some others, but they matter less, in a sort of a harness of rules that apply for everyone. And we have
45.
This is European integration. This is what European integration is about. Depoliticize the very political relationships which always derail in Europe. Because, as I think Milan Kundera once said, Europe is a maximum of diversity on a minimum of territory.
The Czech writer Milan Kundera.
A harness of rules. First, so we did this under the American security umbrella. So the first phase is roughly 1950, the start of the Cold War, or 48 already, something like that. And the start of European integration. So the Americans did our geopolitics. They needed us to form some kind of a buffer against communism. So this was a very boring... That's Aleida Assmann, actually, the German writer. She wrote about this. So this was a very boring Europe, the Cold War Europe. Western Europe, the rest was cut off and behind the...
successful.
But very successful, of course. And we started from below zero, so economy was booming in Germany already in 1952. But boring, because all the music, all the films, all the hip things all came from America. We all looked at America. I mean, you can't imagine this anymore, but...
And the UK.
Yeah. Then, yes. Then 1989, I think, is the second date. Fall of the wall. And we got some more air to breathe. I think many people were extremely happy with that. We could roam around, discover the rest of Europe as well. It was the time of the big enlargement, also the time when we stopped investing in defense mostly. The Americans
end of history.
The end of history. The Americans retreated, and we actually liked it.
Francis Fukuyama has been sort of regular like you here for a while.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Surprise, surprise. So this was the second phase. And now I think we're entering the third phase, all of us, because Germany is at the heart of the modern, or of the post-war Europe. It's still all about Germany.
It's at the heart of the Zeitenwende, as the Germans call it.
Yeah, but we all have to go through a Zeitenwende. I find it a little bit cheap that we're all accusing Germany of not being fast enough with the Zeitenwende. I mean, how fast have the Dutch been with their Zeitenwende? I'm sorry.
Well,
most member states are still stuck. They're still preparing for the last war, if they're preparing at all.
So you're saying the post-89 period is already ended?
Yes.
And we're in a transition to a...
I think the third phase entered a little bit already in 2014, but as I said, nobody saw it.
And why 14?
Nobody wanted to
14 because of the Crimea.
Because of Crimea and Donbass as well.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Nobody wanted to see it. Again, it's not just Germany that needs, a kick in the butt. We all need kicks in the butt.
That's a fair point. Nobody actually thought that was sort of an important moment.
I was living in Vienna at the time, where the Russians were completely sabotaging, for instance, the OSCE.
The Organization of European
And
Cooperation.
I was writing about it, and I don't get this anymore, but I used to get then mails or messages from readers, people I didn't know. It's like, you dirty warmonger. You're provoking the Russians.
Because you warned about Russian aggression.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. And half of Eastern Europe, fleeing Eastern Europe, the Moldovans, the Ukrainians, they were all in Vienna. They're still in Vienna, by the way. That's really, it's the center of that world.
Yeah, it might be a blessing for Vienna, but it's terrible for those countries, of course. Yeah. Yeah.
So, but I think the real page turned in 2022. When we had the full-fledged Russian invasion. Yeah, but again, very interesting. Putin puts 200,000 troops on the border with Ukraine. And he says, no, I'm not going to invade. And we believed him. The only ones who were really convinced it was going to happen were the Americans, because they saw that there were not just troops there, but also special trucks with blood transfusions, which means, if you're just boasting and you're not really ready to fight, you don't do that. And they had found out, of course, American intelligence is superior. We don't have this in Europe, or hardly. And so
they shared it with us.
Even the Ukrainians. Yeah, but we didn't believe it after Iraq. We didn't believe it. So three phases are European, but with Germany at the heart.
Yeah. Right, and I think you're saying many interesting things, but you're saying one in particular, I would say, we're too harsh on Germany because we've been sort of not seeing it and not seeing the world changing. We've been trying to sort of look around next to it as well.
People are very critical of the European Union, and rightly so. There are many things that are good and many things that are less good. But if there's one thing that we've done really very, very well is never again. No more war. Plus jamais ça. Huh? We managed 100% success.
Among the European Union members, we managed. Yeah.
It's such a big success, I would say, that we don't know what war is anymore. We don't recognize it. I mentioned 2014. It's like, no, this is far away, He will stop here. So we don't recognize it. We don't prepare for it. We don't understand anymore the difference. If you're asking for higher defense budgets, people are saying, yes, but we don't want war. We don't understand anymore that if you prepare for war, you actually have a higher chance of having peace because nobody dares to attack you.
Yeah.
That kind of stuff, I mean, we are back to square one. Our big eye-opener was not Putin, it was Trump. Because for all these years we thought, this Putin, he will not attack us. Because he will have a huge clash with the best military alliance in the world, which is NATO. It was Trump, second administration, by casting doubt on, helping us out. I mean, he does this every day. If you let ASML continue to send chips to China, we will not come and defend you. I mean, they connect everything with everything. Yeah. This is how it goes.
Yeah. So that was the real change, not Putin's invasion.
Suddenly we felt like, okay, so if Putin does it, maybe Trump is not going. So suddenly we felt, since a few months only.
I'm glad you're mentioning also our relationship to the Americans, and that gives me the opportunity to go to a fragment which you brought, Philip, of your novel, Schönwalds, family novel. Like we said, featuring the dynamics between parents and daughters and siblings and could you you brought a fragment. We'll read it out in German. It will be here in English. Could you could you explain where we are in the novel at that point?
Well, last night I read a fragment that had to do with Trump and the MAGA movement and everything. This fragment that is selected now is about German history and German guilt and how there is a young...
Oh, right, that's, of course, yeah.
So we have a family, the parents are late 70s, early 80s, so born right after the Second World War. They were the generation that built basically the post-war Germany. Basically the boomer 68 generation, but they were not involved in 68. They were a more, upper middle class conservative academic family. They have 3 kids in their 40s. And the daughter, she wanted to open a progressive queer bookstore in Berlin. And in an interview, she said that the capital to open this bookstore came from her grandfather. She inherited 100,000 euro, and she could use that now to open up to make her dream come true, this queer bookstore in Berlin. And she was happy with everything. And then Generation Z activists, people like in their early 20s, they read that. And there were kids whose parents were immigrants, came from other places, but they are Germans. And they started asking on social media, there's this progressive queer bookstore opening up, and she's saying that she inherited money from her grandfather. What kind of money is that, and what did the grandfather do during the Nazi period? And then they did some Google search, and they found out that the grandfather was somehow, as a very young man, involved into the Wehrmacht, and they deducted from that, okay, this is Nazi money, this is blood money, this is bad money, and you're whitewashing it by opening up a queer bookstore of all places that you could. So, and then, they make a big fuss on social media, and the daughter, the bookstore opener, coming from that family, from that German family where they thought they were the good ones still. We didn't really do anything, but we didn't really look into it either. But we were a good family, and we made careers in post-war Germany. So she ignores them because she said, who are these people? Well, how can they accuse me? Have they done any research? No, they haven't, and I'm opening up a queer bookstore. So she ignores them. And that leads to the bookstore opening, meeting protest outside, and they're throwing paintballs in the window. And so there's massive protest against her opening up the bookstore. And then later on, and this is the part, sorry, I'm being long, this is the part I'm going to read now, her older brother, who used to be a professor at Columbia University for literature. He was kind of a star professor there, young European, post-structuralism, all the cool stuff. He was a star, and he got cancelled, he got fired because he was involved in some Me Too scandal. He didn't do it, but he was covering up for his professor who always protected him. No, he was covering up for him, so he got fired. They made an example out of him. And he got involved with the MAGA and Trump movement.
Out of spite, maybe, over his treatment.
Yeah. He got seduced by another guy. He said, I feel you, I know how you feel, being thrown out by this liberal institution. They're so hypocritical, and I experienced the same thing. Why don't you come to us? We're doing cool podcasts here. MAGA, Trump, Make America Great Again. It's fun, it's cool. Forget about your old liberal values. They're all boring and old and tired. This is the new world. Come to us.
Yeah.
And now, being this MAGA activist, he wants to help his sister, and he is facing these young activists who are accusing his sister of using Nazi money to open up her bookstore. And I think I read it from here. So you should have some English translation over there. So now he's engaging in a debate on social media, streamed live into the internet. Everyone can watch it. He's engaged in a discussion with the activists. And this part starts where one of the activists is accusing him. Secondly. Zweitens, Ihr Großvater war als deutscher Soldat am Angriffskrieg gegen Polen und später Russland beteiligt. Am Ende war er als junger Offizier bei den Kriegsverbrechen und Genoziden gegen die Zivilbevölkerung dabei und hat später durch die Kontinuität des Kapitals ökonomisch davon profitiert. Genauso sein Vater, also Ihr Großvater. Now the brother. Das ist ein schwerer Vorwurf, Azar. Einer der schwersten, den man machen kann. Kriegsverbrechen, wow, Genozid, hoho. Da möchte ich jetzt auf der Stelle eure Beweise sehen. Ansonsten wird es schwer für mich, so gern ich euch mag, meine Anwältin zurückzuhalten, die neben mir sitzt und mich bekniet, euch endlich eine Verleumdungsklage zustellen zu dürfen. Wir alle wissen, wie Anwälte sind. Lass mich deswegen kurz das konkrete Szenario skizzieren, damit es später nicht zu Enttäuschungen kommt. Der Streitwirt würde alle gegenwärtigen und in der Zukunft durch die Verleumdung entstehenden finanziellen Verluste und Schäden berücksichtigen, für meine Eltern sowie für uns 3 Kinder und unsere Familien. Hinzu kämen Schmerzensgeldforderungen mindestens für meine Eltern, die das alles leider sehr belastet, eventuell für meine Geschwister. Als Laie würde ich von einem geschätzten Streitwert von 5 bis 10 Millionen Euro ausgehen. Tut mir wirklich leid. Ich habe nichts gegen euch, ich mag euch sogar. Aber ihr habt Verständnis, nehme ich an, dass ich meine Interessen schützen muss. Genauso die meiner Familie. Wir müssen hier gar nichts beweisen. Ich habe nämlich nichts getan. Sie entstammen einer Tätergeneration, auch wenn Sie das vielleicht erfolgreich verdrängt haben. Sie müssen uns beweisen, dass Ihre Familie nicht in Nazi-Verbrechen verstrickt war. Im Moment sieht es nämlich so aus. Ihr Großvater war Nazisoldat, genauso wie Ihr Urgroßvater. Wenn Chris sich doch nur erinnern könnte, wie der geheißen hatte. Hugo? Aber es war zu gefährlich, den Namen jetzt reinzuwerfen. Azar würde es besser wissen. Von unten schwebten über dem Bildschirm kotzende Emojis nach oben, stiegen auf wie Luftblasen im Wasser. dampfende Fäkalhaufen kamen dazu, gesenkte braune Daumen. Die Margaret-Scholz waren zurück. Chris war sich nicht sicher, ob ihm das half.
Ja, things are profoundly changing, and we've just said it. We're living through a sort of a new Zeitenwende. It's been called like that as well by the German Chancellor, the last German Chancellor, Olaf Scholz, natürlich. But coming back to this, to Germany's reaction on, and you said, you know, Germany has been sort of harshly judged by other Europeans for being late, but how would you react to Caroline's insight on that? In regard to, of course, the invasion of first in Crimea and Donbass, and then more recently, 3 years ago, in February, on a full-scale war.
I was torn in the beginning, and when I read, you know, articles on foreign policy or those magazines accusing Germany that they have to do more, that they have to stop hiding behind their history, that they have to be more taking more responsibility. I always felt
sort of a lot of foreigners, Anglo-Saxons, but also
especially the Brits. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And I always felt kind of weird, and sometimes I was even angry. But
that's interesting. Where did that anger come from? So being accused of being late or being complacent?
Mm-hmm. But I also thought, okay, mind your own stuff. I mean, you know, you just had Brexit, so stop telling the Germans what they should do. You know, you got your own stuff going on. But that's of course a kind of childish reaction. One thing lately. With all the grim stuff that we're seeing at the moment, you know, what happens in the US, what happens in Ukraine, we can't stop this war, we're kind of helpless in Israel and Gaza. So with all these grim pictures, there was one picture that kind of moved me a couple of weeks ago when I actually saw Macron, Starmer and Merz sitting together, debating about something, and that was the first time that I felt some positive things are going on. This is something new. This is something that has, I mean, a lot of things have to go right, and there's a lot of ifs, but there is potential in this picture. That was more a feeling than a thought. There something can happen, and I would like to be part of it. I would like Germany to be part of it. So with all the hesitation, I kind of looked back until 2014, Crimea, we just talked about it. And in retrospect, I now feel, I didn't realize it at the time, I now feel that Germany was really too hesitant, and that the Merkel administration, as well as the Scholz administration, should already have done more. Had taken the hand that Macron always reached out with, and they always kept ignoring that. They just didn't trust him, or they thought he just wanted to make a show for himself. But so they never really reacted to it, and I think had we done that back then, we would be in a better position now. So I think Germany is, you know, economically the strongest nation within the EU. I think with all cautiousness, we should take on more responsibility.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. Because I understood it when Olaf Scholz was Chancellor. I heard voices coming out of Germany. You would be able to read, you know, we are not going to send our tanks eastward again. You know, we did that, you know, in the Second World War. No German tanks attacking Russians anymore. You know? And as a historian and a Dutchman with great interest in German history, I was a bit shocked by that sort of framing, because if out of German Vergangenheitsbewältigung or something like that, you know, you would remembrance culture, you would, you know, be afraid of marching to the east, which, you know, you can understand if you get, but then the atrocities, and the German atrocities specifically, almost all of them happened in Ukraine, not in Russia.
Yeah.
I mean, except for Petersburg. But Babi Yar is Ukraine. And so from a historical point of view, it's rather puzzling, at least for an historian, to hear that argument coming out of Germany.
Yeah. It's lazy as well. It's a bit lazy, that argument.
In what respect?
Well, it's pretty comfortable to hide behind it, to say,
Okay.
oh, we don't want to see this anymore. It's a completely different situation and a completely different setup. And I think the only response to that, saying, no, we don't want to see that anymore, that's too short.
Right. Okay. Yeah. It's in that respect, it's comfortable to hide behind that history.
Exactly. You don't have to engage in any more debate. You just say, no, we can't do that.
Yeah.
Germany, sorry to interrupt.
No, please.
Germany is now the largest contributor to the war effort in Ukraine. Huh? I mean, and all this was started, c'est démarrer, the French say, all this was put into motion under Scholz.
That's true. It started with the helmet.
It started with the helmet.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. And we might have 100 helmets that we could send. That's what we wanted to do, and then we thought, okay, that's it. We're out of it.
None of us wanted to go much further either. And the French, they always said they would want to go further, and they do a lot undercover there, a lot of intelligence and a lot of training and stuff. But they didn't do it either.
No,
also because we hardly have any hardware left. Denmark has no army to speak of. Everything went to, or no weapons, no material. Everything went to Ukraine. Everything. Mm-hmm. They just have nothing left.
Yeah, but you're saying by now the Germans are contributing the biggest amount of.
The Germans are the largest donor or contributor, humanitarian and military.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So that really changed. We have a real short fragment of Olaf Scholz. I think it's nice to look at it for a second.
Sehr geehrte Frau Präsidentin, verehrte Kolleginnen und Kollegen, liebe Mitbürgerinnen und Mitbürger. Der 24. Februar 2022 markiert eine Zeitenwende in der Geschichte unseres Kontinents. Mit dem Überfall auf die Ukraine hat der russische Präsident Putin kaltblütig einen Angriffskrieg vom Zaun gebrochen. Aus einem einzigen Grund: die Freiheit der Ukrainerinnen und Ukrainer stellt sein eigenes Unterdrückungsregime in Frage. Das ist menschenverachtend, das ist völkerrechtswidrig, das ist durch nichts und niemanden zu rechtfertigen.
Would you say that this is a political turnaround, by the most important politician of the country? Would you say that's also a societal shift in Germany, or is this just the political elite who sort of realigns?
No, it actually caused a societal shift, or at least a debate. I mean, but everyone was very psyched after that. Everyone, whether they liked it or not, but everyone felt this is really a turning point. And the day after, a debate started that's been going on until today. But I was very happy back then. I listened to it in the car, on the radio in the car. And I was really happy and thought, wow, that's something now. But after a while, we didn't really follow up on it.
And why was that? Because the Greens followed up. At least I had the impression that the Greens really wanted to follow up, who were in his coalition. But why was he at least portrayed as being hesitant? He might have been indeed, already moving a lot of money, but his enemies at least could portray him as being hesitant.
Yeah. Well, the Greens, as you said, they were all in. But I think they're still, we just saw that a couple of weeks ago with this letter by some Social Democrats. There is this part within the German Social Democrats that's still, their biggest maxim is, since Willy Brandt basically is we have to talk to Russia. We have to get along with Russia. We can't, we overcame the Cold War, and there's always a way for Germany to get along with Russia, and we have to make that effort. That's a very strong part in the Social Democrats. It doesn't exist in the CDU, the Conservative Party. It doesn't exist in the Green, but it's traditionally in the Social Democrats. And just recently, they published a letter, prominent Social Democrats, basically saying the whole Ukraine-Russia policy is wrong. And they're part of the government at the moment, and basically attacked the position that the Chancellor Merz took on.
Yeah, so they still is that mostly sort of guilt about German history and the wars there, or is that something else involved?
Well, I think that's an identity that they have, which is they see themselves as pacifists, and they think pacifism means that we used diplomacy instead of weapons, and we always have to look for a diplomatic solution, which at the moment with Ukraine and Putin is not on the table. It's not possible, but they think we're not trying too hard. And from the other side, they're portrayed as the people from yesterday, which I would kind of support. That is really the old times, ignoring how everything, especially the attitude of Russia and the situation with the US, have changed.
Caroline, Philipp also just said, it's also in a way it's comfortable or lazy to hide behind that sort of history. You could also say, it might be part of their identity. It might be part of the idea of being pacifist or being in a position in which you should make peace, especially with the Russians. You could also say, of course, that there's economic reasoning behind it, because like Gerhard Schröder, personally, who became first the chancellor, then became president of the firm of the pipeline, going through the Baltics. That so handel durch wandel durch handel is also really comfortable in an economic way, of course.
But I think there is more going on in Europe about that, because France and Germany, the major powers in Europe, still European integration is about these two. And they never agree on anything, and this is it's between those two.
Yes, sure.
So what is happening? The French have always advocated European defense. They shot it down in 1954.
Yeah, the goal was moving out of NATO and that sort of things for a long time.
But they've always hammered on more, not relying too much on America. Germany, to counter that, because if an almost demilitarized Germany, relying on France would make Germany too dependent of France, and so they were much more putting their eggs in the American basket. So the French keep saying, "See, America is and in Washington they're not lying awake of Russia, let alone Ukraine. What keeps them awake at night is China. So we have to prepare. We have to, have our own military sovereignty in Europe." Germany has always resisted that. They've always believed that, by being nice to Washington, they could keep Washington in to counter the French. So this is the dynamic, and suddenly Washington is checking out, or
it's out of the equation.
Voila, yeah. And Washington, moreover, Washington, they hate the EU. So they only do do business, but that's a different story. We need another evening on this. But anyway, because it's very dangerous in my view, and so they make, they only deal with nations individually. They deal with Merz, they deal with Macron,
but
they
not
deal
with von der Leyen.
On the phone sometimes.
Yeah, hardly. Yeah.
But they slam her on the head basically.
That's how they deal with her. Yeah.
Anyway, so what the Trump administration is doing, is throwing us under the bus, basically. There's no common approach possible with this American administration, which proves Macron's point that bloody hell, we need to rely on ourselves from now on, which is very difficult for Germany because it put all its eggs in the American basket. And so there is a lot going on under the surface between France and Germany, because it is one thing that Macron always, the French, it's very interesting. The French always seek like grandeur in Europe by making Europe a bit more French. The Germans want to make the Germans a bit more European. It's completely... The French are losing grandeur. We're all losing grandeur.
Het written on tout pour la gloire de la France. Huh?
Voilà. Yeah. And so they seek like reincarnation in Europe by embracing it, by thinking for the entire Europe. Germany is seeking redemption. It doesn't want... The French want to lead. The Germans, they hate leading. They're afraid of it. During the negotiations, nuclear negotiations with Iran, 10 years ago, before the nuclear deal, if the Germans wanted to propose something, they would go to the EU delegation and say, can you propose this for us? The French have no such problem. No. They just, une grande idée après l'autre, And then the Germans can say, le petit Napoleon. So this dynamic is very much so. When all the screws are coming loose, as they are coming now, we need a new kind of equilibrium in Europe. And we're getting it, because that picture moved me too. Yeah. The good thing is, to finish.
Please go ahead. Yep.
Over 100 years ago, Europeans dominated the whole world. The dominant capitals in the world were Paris and London, even Vienna, believe it or not. Today, the situation is completely opposite. The world is dominating Europe. And so our leaders are really understanding that we've become provincial. What we do in the Middle East, it hardly matters anymore. And so we must work together. Over 100 years ago, we didn't need each other. So we had the First World War, it clashed. They were rivaling with one another. Now, I think our leaders, they feel so marginalized. The French army is the strongest in Europe. Was. Poland is now stronger, I would say. But French is, they have a serious army. Huh? They are kicked out of one tiny African country after another.
Yeah, by the Russian Wagner group.
I went to talk to a military historian in France. They have the best. And he was explaining to me, we're one of the most serious armies in Europe. Do you know how many kilometers of front we can sustain with what we have now? 80. 80 kilometers of France can be defended, not more.
Look at the 4,000 kilometer long front of the Ukrainians.
So our leaders, they must, and that's what I see in Brussels, everybody's talking about the far right and fragmentation. And no, I see cohesion. They all realize if we go alone, and it's hard. They bicker because they have all different interests. So, there's a jockeying going on, but they need to get there, and they know it.
And a little sidestep, but and that is indeed another discussion here in the Balie. But so you think that G.D. Vance's speech in Munich was not just, trying to get an opening from the Europeans? It was meant. He was adamant about his. He was disgusted about Europe, and that was very obvious in that speech. Yeah. So you think he meant that?
Yeah.
He meant it, and
it was hard, it was deeply felt.
And now there's a follow-up. The State Department has put out a document, just on Substack, but it has a logo of the State Department, somebody working there with his name under it. And they don't just say, like G.D. Vance did, Europe is the biggest problem for Western civilization, and you're all woke,
quite a statement.
and that kind of stuff. It's your book, basically. But actually, Europe is a threat to American security. Black on white. American security and economic interests are threatened by this kind of Europe.
You agree, Philip? You said yes.
I spent 3 days with J.D. Vance in 2017 when his book came out.
You did? Yeah.
Great book. I thought it was a great book, and I said, I want to meet this guy.
Hillbilly
Elegy.
Yeah.
And he said, yeah, come by, let's talk. So I went to Ohio and we spent 3 days there. He showed me, where he came from, his mother's house. And so it was all very shocking because it was very poor and everyone was strung out on drugs. But we talked a lot. But back then already, he didn't get the whole European thing, and he asked me a lot about Germany and Europe. He didn't know much. He's highly intelligent and very fast, but he didn't know much. And back then already, I was astounded and surprised how much he despised, obviously, Europe and Germany. And that just went on. But he's not alone. I mean, this is a culture in the US, and that's always been there, even through the good times. It's always been a streak in American identity that they don't get this multilateralism that we have here.
Always moaning about this one phone number that they can't find.
Exactly.
Get over it.
They don't get it. They want a leader. They want one guy to talk to. That's the American sentiment, and that's a big problem. And so I was one of those when you just talked about the old West Germany that always wanted to be with his big brother, the US. I was one of those who completely grew up with that, with American culture, American literature, American movies, American pop music. The first thing I could, when I was 18, I moved to the US. I, spent a year there at school. Then later I studied there, and I always wanted to be American. And now my daughter is American because she was born there. And still, when I'm at the airport, I put her blue passport, the blue American passport, on top of our German passports. So everyone thinks we're all American. Well, I might stop this now, but I did
that was once.
I did for a while. I really
check your social media beforehand.
Exactly. I really feel that we have. This is gone. This is not gonna come back. Whether Trump or anyone else, this era of American protectionism here in Europe is gone. They don't want it anymore. It started with Obama, who reminded us the NATO spending, and so it didn't stop with Trump. I mean, it's a long concern the Americans had. They're not going to come back. And I one last sentence.
Yes, please.
Like in a love relationship, at some point there is the point she's not going to come back or he's not going to come back. This is over. And then you really want to get it over with and look for alternatives. And I really think, and that's why I was moved by this picture, because this is the alternative that I saw there.
And if I can add one sentence, America is gone. Ukraine is in. Because we need Ukraine for our defense. It's the best army we have.
Yeah,
it's true.
Yeah, you're saying
yesterday evening when you had
the
this
amount of front line the French can hold and the Ukrainians can hold, that's a big difference. Yeah.
But they produce weapons. In America, they're like 10 times more expensive, and we have months to wait for all these weapons. It's all digital. So if the Americans want, they can sabotage everything just by cancelling the software or deleting it, blocking it. And you're saying they might even do those sort of things. So Ukraine, I really wanted to jump on your table yesterday night with the Ukrainians because there is no war fatigue. There's no Ukraine fatigue in Europe because of Trump. We need Ukraine for our security. Mm-hmm. We always say Ukraine needs us for their security, but it is the other way around now. It's good. Because we said we were going to look at Germany's Zeitenwende and 2 wars, and one of them is the war in Ukraine. So I'd like to go to a little fragment of Merz, just very recently on Israel. I would want to talk with you a little bit on Germany's approach of the Middle East, and especially of Gaza and Israel, of course, because there is a different war where we can talk about German attitude, in the world and in foreign policy. Can we have a short look at
Chancellor Merz.
Für die Bundesrepublik Deutschland folgt daraus: Existenz und Sicherheit des Staates Israel sind und bleiben unsere Staatsräson. Mit dem 7. Oktober ist diese historische Verantwortung wieder sehr konkret geworden. Israel ist an diesem Tag auf barbarischste Weise angegriffen worden. Überlebende des Holocaust haben erleben müssen, wie ihre Angehörigen in die Geiselhaft der Hamas genommen worden sind. Ich möchte unseren israelischen Freunden da von dieser Stelle sagen, wir stehen unverbrüchlich an der Seite Israels. Und wir unterstützen alle Bemühungen und erwarten sie auch für eine bessere humanitäre Versorgung der Bevölkerung in Gaza, deren Leiden wir sehen, das der Kinder, der Frauen und der älteren Menschen vor allen Dingen. Uns erreichen heute Nachrichten, dass eine akute Hungersnot in Gaza drohen könnte. Es ist eine humanitäre Verpflichtung, meine Damen und Herren, liebe Kolleginnen und Kollegen, aller Beteiligten, und ich betone aller Beteiligten, dass eine Hungersnot in der Region schnellstmöglich abgewendet wird.
Yes, we just saw the Chancellor, this Chancellor, not the last one, reaffirming Germany's obligation towards the State of Israel. Caroline, would you say that in this respect, I mean, we've just been talking about Germany's approach towards the east, towards Ukraine, and we've seen a shift there. Would you say that this is the same Germany, or has there been changes in this approach as well, or is this just the sort of continuation of the earlier period?
I think it's a continuation.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
But I also think it is problematic.
In what respect?
Because, I mean, Europe has always, and Germany, you know, it's just one and the same in a way.
In many ways.
I have done very well with the international rules-based system. If we keep letting Israel off the hook, which we are doing, we're destroying that system. And I think we can both support Israel and the Palestinians. And I think this is what we should do. I think international law should be our guideline, because if we don't, we cannot continue to condemn Russia for its brutal attacks on Ukraine and its citizens, and just say, okay, yes, Israel is it should abide by humanitarian law, and then do nothing. It's just not credible. And so nobody takes us seriously. And this, I think, is not very good.
Yeah, I
Philipp,
kind of agree. I would add that I think after this speech, Merz put the Israeli government on the spot and that I don't understand anymore what they are doing, and I think this has to stop. And that was a big thing in Germany, because that's not happened before. And on the one hand, he says, well, we have this traditional stance with Israel, but he actually said he doesn't understand it anymore. And that was a step forward, in my opinion.
So you would say you could see also a shift there, or is that too early to say?
I think there is a slight shift. They're not going to destroy the foundation of that Germany is on the side of Israel, but he criticized the Netanyahu government, and that's a slight,
but
very slight
according
shift.
to international law, you need to do more. We have a trade agreement with Israel, and I mean it's been violated. When I was living in the Gaza Strip, lots of strawberries came from Gaza. I mean, they had the best strawberries in the world, and all the strawberries went into Israel, and then put into boxes, product from Israel, and this is how they could get them into Europe without any tariffs. Everybody knew these strawberries were coming from the Gaza Strip, you know. And we've known this for 30 years. And it has continued. We've never acted. But according to the contract that we have, the treaty with the Israelis, I mean, there should be.
Yeah, there's a very different history, of course, with
and
the Germans.
And we keep warning them once in a while when it really gets too hot. But what is happening in Gaza right now? I was with Sigrid Kaag in Warsaw yesterday. So she was the humanitarian coordinator for Gaza.
Yeah.
What is happening there is they are starved. Like 500,000 people are about to starve right now. They can't get food.
You could also argue, of course, that...
And the Israelis want to push them out of the Gaza Strip.
You could also
what we need to do right now is also get ready for the next phase.
But you could also argue, Caroline, you could also... No, we're getting back to the German position. You could also argue that the Germans are the ones who are really consequential about the fact that the state of Israel is there because of the European anti-Semitism, of course.
Yeah,
the root of that state is a European problem.
We're focusing now on something else. We're focusing on what's happening to the people in Gaza. There's a humanitarian disaster there.
I think it's important in a strategic way. It's also important that Germany stays with Israel, because if Germany says something, they listen. I think if Spain says something, they don't listen because they think, well, you know, they're partly anti-Semitic anyway. But if Germany says something, you can reach them. And
I'm not saying that we should not be with Israel. I'm saying you can be with Israel and the Palestinians. That's my point.
Yeah.
Without being called an anti-Semite.
That's what he tried to do in the little thing we just saw. That's what he tried to do. You know, he made a point of mentioning the Palestinian suffering. I think the shift that we're seeing, that comes back to your point, the big shift that we're seeing is that international law loses its meaning more and more. You could argue that it started in '99 when NATO, you know, bombed Kosovo.
Kosovo and Serbia.
Yeah, where a lot of people said this was a justified strike. We had to do that, or NATO had to do that. But still, up until today, people argue that was against international law. Same with Iran now.
Clearly against international law.
Yeah, and still, a lot of people would say it was necessary.
Yeah, politically necessary, perhaps. But international law has clear rules about, you know, what is an imminent threat.
Yeah.
And clearly, it's not an imminent. It's a threat, but it's not an imminent military threat.
Yeah. If we come back to the start of our conversation. We talked a little bit about the uniqueness of the Holocaust as a historical phenomena, and maybe because of that uniqueness, you could say the Germans feel sort of a unique guilt. Is that fair to say?
Well, I think you could say that. That's at least what was the case for many decades. That Germans even thought they were unique in the guilt that they had to feel. Yeah.
Would you say that's still related to Germany's approach of the Middle East and Israel in particular? Yeah.
Well, there's this huge, almost philosophical debate about universalism versus particularism. The universalist would say the Holocaust, the learning from the Holocaust is basically to avoid all form of massacre, whether it's in concentration camps in Eastern Europe or in the Gaza Strip. That's basically the universalist answer to that, which becomes stronger and stronger. And the particularists say, no. Israel is a very particular situation. You can't compare it to anything, and we can't use any analogies. And I think we are, nowadays, we should listen more to the universalist side. Otherwise, international law and working together is not going to work.
Mm-hmm.
And the rest of the world is also watching.
Watching at whom?
At us. They're watching us, and they're seeing that in one case we support the aggressor, and in the other case we support the victim.
Yeah.
And so it's.
So you
it's
would
not,
call, but then you would call
consistent.
Israel the aggressor?
In the Gaza Strip, I think clearly.
No, but if you factor in
Yes.
October 7,
October 7 was terrible, and I think it's completely it reawakened the trauma of the Holocaust. It was the worst attack on the Jewish nation. I completely agree with that, and I totally condemn it. But by now, you know, according to UN estimates, there are like 80,000 Palestinians who have been killed. So on the Palestinian side, their national trauma has been awakened, which is the Nakba.
What Philip is referring to, of course, is also the fact that Israel has been under rocket attack for decades, and so I mean it's a point of view you could take, and it's a point of view you could take, of course, that there's an ongoing decades-long bombardment of a tiny state.
There was a very interesting comment by Carl Bildt, the former Swedish prime minister, and he said, We've all seen the incredible military superiority of Israel. In Lebanon, on Gaza, and the West Bank as well, don't forget the West Bank, on Syria, on Iran, on the Houthis.
American superiority or Israeli superiority?
But now, wait, but now... So they won all these battles, basically. They came out strongest. Very impressive. But now it is time that they show us that they can also make peace. That they cannot just bomb everybody flat.
Making peace is an important feature of a nation state.
Comes in.
It's an important feature. And making peace you do with your enemies. Actually, people tend to forget that, not with your friends.
Do you think you can beat Hamas by bombing Palestinian civilians?
I don't know.
Not sure.
I'm happy. I'm not an Israeli general. I'd like to go to the public, as we always do here, and thank you very much for this conversation and open thinking about Germany's position in our EU and internationally. I think it's amazing exchange and I think we learned a lot. I'm wondering whether there are any questions in the audience before we, as we always do. I'd like to remind people that a question is sort of a sentence with a question mark at the end. And I see Joel Gamzu over there, which is wonderful to see you. And I will hold the microphone for you.
So, hello. I have two short questions. One to you. You've just said that October 7th was horrible, but... And my question is if you don't feel that this but came a little too quickly. And my second question is to you, because you've just mentioned the difference between the universalist and the particularist approach, which I find very, very interesting and a very ambivalent and complicated question. Which particularities do you think are still relevant in the judgment of Israel these days?
So, 7 October is horrible, but... I mean, it doesn't come out of nowhere. And I'm condemning it completely. And Israel has the right to exist, and it has the right to defend itself. But you cannot just pretend that all Palestinians are out just to obliterate Israel. This is not the case. That's what, and it's Israel's response to this, as mad as it is about justified about 7 October, is. It's completely off the rails, in my view.
Philip?
That's what I wanted to say.
I'm no expert on Israel, but I would say the particularities would be living, with the threat of attacks for like decades and being surrounded by neighbors that don't like you. And I think that's a particular situation that almost no other country has, or no other nation faces.
I think I saw other hands, if I'm not mistaken. Yes, the gentleman over there. Excuse me.
And in the end, it's the Germans' fault as well. Yeah, because that's why Israel is there.
I would like to go back to Germany. America is out of the picture of Germany. That's what you basically said. Who should Germany turn to now? Since it's also clear that France is very dominant and always has been very dominant in their own nationalistic view of how to run Europe. I put it a little bit out of proportion, but how can this continue? What's the end game now?
We all have a nationalistic view of what to do with Europe. This is not a French particularity. Everybody, we have, the far right is always saying, we want the Europe of nations. I mean, we have it. The member states take all the decisions in Brussels. And some are a bit bigger and some are a bit smaller. So what you see in Brussels, all these fights are normal. They're trying to find, everybody states their interests and their wishes, and it's an expression of national taboos, national culture, geography, the whole mix. And then in the end, they try to reach a compromise. But with every new issue, they have to explore all that. And they say they have to start negotiating. And this is actually the stage we're in. But what I see is that our leaders are more and more convinced that they can't go it alone anymore. Even Viktor Orban doesn't want to go out of the EU. And he's actually a smart man too, like Vances. And, he explains this also in speeches. And I read his speeches sometimes. I mean, it's a bit depressing, but it's very interesting too, because he's also honest in a way. And then he says, if I go out, my biggest market is the EU. So if I want to do business with the rest of Europe, I need to copy all the rules that are, market rules. So if I'm in, I can co-decide. Maybe Hungary is small and, it's not very much loved by the others at the moment, to put it mildly. But, you have leverage. And so if you go, you can, for instance, you can block Sweden. Well, he does the same in NATO. You can block Sweden from entering the club for a year without even explaining a single time what it is you want exactly. It's just power. Yeah. So this, all these mechanisms, the weaker all the nations are, and the nation states are, the more they are forced to find these compromises. And that's all you see. And the French, of course, they have ideas. The French, since the French Revolution, because the French Revolution was not just for France, it was good for the rest of the world. It's a universal view. And so this is also how the French are looking at Europe. So this is always why Germany never wants to launch big ideas, because it's uncomfortable, and the rest is also uncomfortable with Germany doing that still. And Germany is very aware of it. So the French are doing it. And I remember in Brussels during the presidency of François Hollande, there were no big ideas coming from Paris anymore. This was during the Euro crisis, because Hollande was so stuck in internal jockeying. So no grands idées from Paris, and then everybody was complaining that there were no grands idées from Paris because nobody else launches them. So all these things are total cliches, but they are cliches. They're cliches for a reason. Yeah. So we need the French, and then we all water it down, and Germany doesn't answer for a year, and then they do answer, and they work out a compromise. This is how it goes.
If we lose the French next year,
if you comment, Philip, do it in the mic, please. Yep.
What if we lose France next year?
Yeah, that's a very good
government.
question.
What then?
It's a scary question. Yeah.
But I think the interesting thing is, since Brexit, since Putin, since Trump especially, the populists in Europe have completely, they all wanted exits before. And Marine Le Pen wanted an exit from the Eurozone, and so on. She wanted to get close to Russia again. She's not saying all these things anymore.
Look how well Meloni does with
Meloni. Meloni did a huge U-turn on 3 issues. She was pro-Russian and became pro-Ukrainian. She was very critical of NATO. Now she's a staunch NATO supporter, and she wanted to leave the Eurozone. She tried, when she won the elections, she tried to get, what's his name again? Anyway, the Italian board member of the European Central Bank as her Minister of Finance, to show the markets and all the other Eurozone countries that, no, I'm actually, the euro is guaranteeing our stability. Yeah.
I have two more questions, I think. There's one over here.
Yes. I'm born close to the German border. If you're in the Netherlands, usually you look west, but I was used to look east and went to Germany every year as a student all the time. And we're talking about cliches, etc. But one thing that strikes me in recent years is that, of course, the Germans always had felt guilt and so on. But what they lack now in recent years is self-confidence. They are so pessimistic about themselves. And my question is, why is that?
A little psychoanalysis of the German soul. Yeah.
But it's not just the Germans. I will buy you some time.
Thank you.
I don't think it's just the Germans. I mean, are you following the French press? You should look south as well. Following the Italian press? Everybody, I wrote an article a couple of months ago, which was sort of the best read in Foreign Policy magazine this year. And it was called "Pessimism is Europe's Biggest Problem." We are so afraid of catastrophe, that everything goes off the rails, that we always see the glass as half empty. When we discuss Europe, we're only discussing the far right. We're discussing political fragmentation. We're discussing, German car industry going bust. But we forgot to mention that at the same time, the weapons industry is going through the roof. There are all kinds of new industries, and all the people who work in the car industry are now happily employed, or partially happily, but in any case employed, by the weapons industry. So, it's really... It's a European specialty.
No. I'd like to.
But now I've bought your time. Now.
We have a last question, and we need to.
Still hard to answer. Well, I myself am a heavy, doubtful German mind, and so I tend to be pessimistic as well, also as a writer, because if you read that book, you're going to be a pessimist afterwards as well. I would say at the moment, Germans have problems adjusting to new realities. And at the moment, everything is shifting so heavily everywhere that the Germans are not there yet to embrace it and have to get used to the new realities. Maybe then they can be a little bit optimistic again. On the other hand, I think we should have been a little more pessimistic 10 years ago. We just talked about the oblivion that especially the Germans, but also other nations didn't see coming what was clearly to see in 2014, for example. And we just were, it's going to be fine, and the US will never leave us. That was too optimistic. So a little bit, I think Germany got a dose of realism in the last 2 to 3 years, and I think that was needed. And if we are pessimistic for a while, maybe that helps to change faster and better.
The last word is for Iswanto. The last word is for Iswanto Hartono, artist from Indonesia. Later on today, also in the program on the forum.
Yeah, thank you. I just want to briefly. It's very interesting. I learned a lot, but there is few. I think one question that came to my mind is that. Still very much the discussion, I would say, on the very Western superiority of perspective on the history, I think. For example, not in particularly, of course, Holocaust for the German, but the rest, as you say, Caroline, about the Dutch involvement, for example, during the Second World War. And the kill that, but I think, for example, that in terms of, let's say, numbers, I mean, how many Indonesians was being killed during the Dutch colonized for more than 200 years, or the German occupation into Africa, for example. I mean, so I would say that then the question is that numbers is matters, or then everything just what happened now actually is just centered on the killed over the Second World War. But
I would agree with you that this discussion as well was pretty Eurocentric or Western-centric, obviously. We at Der Spiegel, we recently printed an essay by Pankras Misha, and I didn't agree with a lot of he wrote, but what was interesting is he wrote the rest of the world, except for the West, the rest of the world doesn't understand what we're talking about. What they're still talking about, this Holocaust 80 years ago, the big narrative of the last 50, 60, 70 years was decolonization. And that's what was going on in all these countries except for the West. And that's the big story. And that's basically why the rest of the world, or big parts of the rest of the world, is siding with the Palestinians and not with Israel, because they think the West has had it in the last 100 years, and it's not the story anymore. The story or history went somewhere else, and only the Westerners in Western Europe and in the US don't realize that.
Maybe some people in Moscow as well, but anyhow, you make a good point. Yeah.
Maybe just one. I was interested also when you reading about I haven't read the book, Philip, but I think that the characters there with the Germans and the immigrants that questioning about the Nazi. But also I was trying actually, because recently actually there are maybe not only in German, but they are very much popular, the words imported anti-Semite in Europe, so that it's I mean, lots of course, then immigrants who bring the anti-Semitism, not came from Europe. So just wondering, is there any parallel, specific in your novel or not with that?
Your question is about imported anti-Semitism and whether the characters in my novel.
I mean, I just try to have about the question. My question is about the characters, because then if there's any specific that you use the characters as immigrants, as Ashar, let's say there, but correct me if I'm wrong, who questioning the case of this inheritance. But also, I mean, I just thought because very much recently a lot of debates. I mean, I heard words even. The new chancellor was saying that in the headlines of the newspaper that's imported anti-Semitic. I think, for example, in Indonesia, I came from Indonesia, of course. The word anti-Semitic came from during the Dutch colonials. So, I mean, we don't have history. I mean, there are lots of Jews even before.
So you're asking about whether there is something of an imported anti-Semitism in Germany, and that's right.
Well, this argument has been made, as you said, even I think by the chancellor as well before he became chancellor. It shouldn't be an excuse, but it is also a fact that if you look at the demonstrations that I see in Berlin almost every day, it's a lot of people, I wouldn't say immigrants, but a lot of people who came from different places to Berlin, from Barcelona, from London, from anywhere in the world, and parts of the protest in Germany and from the river to the sea demonstrations are dominated by people that are coming from other places than Germany. That's true. That's a fact. Yeah.
there's a lot more to say about these topics. If you start talking about Germany and Germany's position in the heart of Europe and Germany's position in the heart of all these discussions, and you include the Middle East with it, it's hardly surprising that 2 hours are not enough. On the other hand, it's wonderful that you covered so much ground. It's always a great pleasure to listen to Caroline de Gruyter. And also, I think it's very nice that we heard some things which are actually very optimistic in all this doom and gloom we've been hearing about our continent and the position of the continent in the world. And I think there's much there's much truth in that, the things you just said. And it's also wonderful, Philipp Oehmke, that you are commenting on Germany in I would say in some respects total new light. We've been hearing from Germans for a long time, which is very interesting, and you have every reason to comment on it as an important journalist who is commissioning also a lot of articles in Der Spiegel and writing about it, and writing a wonderful novel, and we're looking for the second one. Caroline de Gruyter is writing another book as well, as we understood. I think it's about Europe, if we understood it rightly. And I'd like to thank the Goethe Institute for working together with us in a great matter. And I'd like to point out that with your ticket you can go to Andrei Kurkov, to Isvanto Hartono, and to Tino Segal, who was here before as well today, and to many other programs. So hope to see you back in an hour or half an hour or later today, and otherwise maybe on another time at the Balie. Thank you very much also Veronica Baas for organizing this, editor of the Balie.
Thank you.